Hey everyone, welcome back to So Wizard Podcast Rundown of AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies, 10th Anniversary Edition. Before we get started, please remember to subscribe to our channel. It really helps us grow our audience. If you're seeing this on Patreon, thank you so much for your support. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching, and if you'd like to get these videos a week early, along with other bonus content, check us out on Patreon. Tiers start at just $1 a month. Number 83 on the list is 1997's Titanic. Now, you've heard of this movie, you've probably seen this movie, and you've definitely heard the song. It remains one of the top-earning movie releases of all time. Expertly made with intense passion by James Cameron, Titanic was an international sensation that has never faded from the public eye. It's been a piece of pop culture since it debuted December 19th, 1997. Titanic tells the story of the infamous ship and its one and only tragic journey. The movie weaves a fictional love story between two characters that were not real people, but are inserted into very real history. It was actually pitched as Romeo and Juliet on the Titanic. There's a slew of real historical figures that are represented, and from what I know about the history, represented accurately. The story primarily focuses on Rose DeWitt Bukater, played by Kate Winslet. Rose is a high society girl living under the thumb of her harsh mother and controlling fiancé. She's always on, meaning that she's always performing. Her whole life is acting. She's set to marry Cal Hockley, played by Billy Zane, in a surprisingly good, though slimy, performance. This marriage has no basis in love, but rather one that involves appearance and, of course, money. On the other side is a drifter. He gambles his way onto the ship. Jack Dawson, played by Leonardo Dicaprio, has none of the material possessions that make up Rose's life, but he lives free. The two are from opposite worlds, and through circumstances they come to meet and fall in love. Now the story is bookended with the point of view of Rose at 100 years old. Her narration moves the story along as the fateful night brings the audience closer to the inevitable. The older Rose is telling her story to a group of Titanic treasure hunters after they find a drawing Jack does of the younger Rose while they're looking for an infamous necklace, the heart of the ocean. These treasure hunters know every fact, stat, and figure of the ship's journey and sinking, but they never connected with it on a human level. Through Rose, they get the complete picture, which changes their lives forever. The real-life story, tragedy, lessons, hubris, on and on and on, about the Titanic have been capturing the world's attention since that fateful night over 100 years ago. It's such a shocking piece of history, many people can't get enough of it because they can't fully accept the facts. Obviously, we all believe the story. This isn't some nutty conspiracy theory video, but so rarely do we have so much evidence and so much coverage of a completely preventable tragedy. The staggering loss of life with no war to blame and a clear timeline that hindsight says could have been done so much better with such little effort. There have been countless tellings, articles, interviews, novels, fiction and nonfiction, miniseries, movies. The most famous, aside from Cameron's Titanic, of course, is probably the story entitled A Night to Remember. That's been a book, a series, dramatization, a movie, all at different times throughout history, with so many tellings and so many attempts. Why is it that in 1997, a movie about real-world events but following fictional characters was so impactful? Now, from everything I've read, and having seen this movie way more times than I care to admit, it's not a bad movie, but my wife watches this no fewer than, 8 to 10 times a year. I'd say that the success of Titanic has a two-pronged approach to the hearts and minds of the audience. The Romeo and Juliet type love story captures the audience's heart. It's a lot more genuine than that Shakespearean play. Each character is made whole by the other. Their connection goes beyond simple infatuation of teenagers and is given organic growth over the course of the movie. Leonardo DiCaprio had already been acknowledged as a great actor at the time. He got an Oscar nomination for What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and teenage girls did love him for some of his less serious projects, less serious than Gilbert Grape, I mean. But once Titanic hit, he was a worldwide phenom at the level of the Beatles at their height. Titanic also elevated Kate Winslet to be an international superstar, not to mention giving her an Oscar nomination. The supporting cast, portraying both real and fictional characters, was equally as strong as the leads. Portraying the older Rose, Gloria Stewart, also received an Oscar nomination. Bookending the story in such a way gave the audience a great jumping-in point. This was a way to do narration without it being lazy exposition or without it making any sense to the story and the way it was filmed. And there's also something to care about after the film, or after the core story of the film. Gloria Stewart's portrayal of the elder Rose is a hope-filled part of the movie. Not only that we know she makes it out alive, so we have someone to follow and someone to be attached to through the tragedy, but also that, in the end, she's at peace. Regardless of what your conclusion to the ultimate ending of the movie is, since Cameron left it open on purpose. Frances Fisher, Kathy Bates, Billy Zane, Bill Paxton, and Victor Garber are a handful of other actors that deserve special shout-outs. I could talk for an hour about the exceptional performances, but we have more to cover, so let's just say there isn't a weak link in the whole chain. The other prong in the two-pronged approach that I brought up before was Cameron's obsessive attention to detail and historical accuracy. Cameron actually went ahead with this movie as a ploy to get Hollywood to fund some dives to the wreckage to sate his own curiosity. He had been fascinated by shipwrecks and the Titanic specifically on a personal level for many years. So diving down with the existing technology wasn't enough for Cameron. He actually invented new technologies that could do a better job. He shot all of that real-world footage of the ship that we see in the movie. These experiences affected him on an emotional level more than he could have guessed. This emotional response was channeled in the making of the movie and his desire to be as accurate and truthful as possible. A recreation, though scaled much smaller, of the ship was created down to the last nut and bolt based on the original blueprints that Cameron obtained from the original company that built the ship. The fittings, uniforms, dishes, and other stage dressings were all recreated in an equally detailed way. They even went as far to go to the original carpet manufacturers and hire them to recreate the carpet with the exact materials in the exact methods for all 18,000 square feet that was used in the recreation and on the sets. Every scene taking place in 1912, the year the Titanic made its voyage, totals up to 2 hours and 40 minutes. That is the exact time it took for the Titanic to sink after it hit the iceberg. The scene where the Titanic strikes the iceberg, that would ultimately be its undoing, lasts for only 37 seconds. This is the exact amount of time the real Titanic was striking the real iceberg. Little details like that no audience member would ever know without a trivia section on a website, but it was important to Cameron to do it right. More than 150 of the extras were given personal instruction by Cameron himself on real-world passengers they would be representing. First-hand accounts, letters, and historical records were all used to develop these characters and paint this picture of these real people. There's a scene where children are being put into a lifeboat by their father, and his last words in the movie are the same last words that the real father gave to the little girl. They got this information from one of the real-life little girls, obviously grown up at the time of the making of this movie, and she remembers that was the last time she saw her father. There's also a scene that many people remember. It's heartbreaking. There's an older couple hugging each other laying in bed as the freezing water overtakes their room. That was Ira and Isidore Strauss. The Strausses owned Macy's department store. These little details aren't made clear in the film. Example, Ira and Isidore Strauss are never called by name. There's no attention brought to it. But the realism translates perfectly into the audience's emotions. There was one detail that Cameron missed on, however. It was of the night sky when the ship was going down and everyone was out in the water. The stars were positioned wrong in the initial release. When this was brought to Cameron's attention, he went in and digitally fixed this error for subsequent releases. Some people scoffed at this, saying it was unnecessary and unnecessary expense, but hopefully with the information that I've given you in this little video is enough to give you a clear sense of how important this project was to James Cameron. Knowing how into it he was makes this decision completely understandable and really inevitable. The movie wasn't thought to be the massive hit we all know it as. With a budget of $200 million, it was the most expensive movie ever made at the time. There was all sorts of quips about how it cost more than the actual ship did. The bloated budget, there was many behind-the-scenes issues and countless setbacks, had critics coming up with their own tired pun headlines about Titanic sinking at the box office. When Titanic debuted, it made a mere $28.6 million opening weekend. This was enough to give it first place for the weekend box office, but hardly setting the world on fire. Then word of mouth started to get around, and in subsequent weeks, the movie did better and better. Not unheard of, but certainly not the norm. Then after a couple weeks, it had made over $120 million. Titanic had an unnaturally long theatrical run. So long that theaters were sent fresh reels of the film from the studios, since the reels were literally being worn out from overuse. An astonishing 8 weeks into its run, Titanic's best financial single day grossed over $13 million. Titanic would dominate the box office and be a clear number one for 15 straight weeks. It would stay in theaters for 10 months. By the end of its run, one of the longest theatrical runs in history, it had grossed over $600 million domestically. This number doubled internationally, making Titanic's theatrical run over $1.8 billion worldwide. Keep in mind, that's money from 1997 to 1998. Titanic was nominated for 14 Oscars. A couple movies have tied with this, but this number stands as the most any film has gotten. Out of the 14, it would go on to win 11 of them, mostly technical and music, and I don't believe any of the actors actually walked home with a statue. Along with the 11 Oscars, it had won an additional 112 awards and received 83 more nominations on top of that. At this point, you may be wondering, how can someone do a video about Titanic, the movie, without talking about the song? Yes, the song. Well, we've all heard that song to death. It was a powerful song, it was well performed and well written, and every single person in the world is sick to death of hearing it, including the person who recorded it, so I'm going to call it here. Movies as big as Titanic that are so firmly a part of pop culture are easy to parody and poke holes in. Take a new, objective look at the movie and stop telling the same tired jokes. The magic is still very much alive. The stories, fictional and real, are still captivating. This is a well-made, well-acted, well-crafted movie that deserves its place in pop culture history. Thanks for watching. Be sure to come back next week for number 82, Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, a silent film from 1927. Remember, these AFI countdown videos hit a week early for our patrons on Patreon. Tiers start at only $1 a month, and you get multiple monthly bonus shows along with it. Be sure to listen to Subwizard Podcast every single week wherever you get your podcasts. SubWizardPodcast.com is your resource for reviews, recommendations, videos, merchandise, and more. We love hearing feedback, so drop us a note in the comments or leave us something on social media. All of our accounts can be found after the show and in the show notes.